Hi there, this is your narrator, Ali, and I hope you are ready to relax and hear the story of a bitter and lonely Mandarin who uses stolen magic to seek revenge on the children who mock him, commanding a butterfly to turn them into pigs. But the gentle creature begins to question its master's cruelty and quietly chooses compassion over obedience. In the end, the Mandarin's own wickedness leads to a magical twist that changes everything. In every town, there are certain doors that children love to peep through, doors with strange smells behind them, doors with unfamiliar signs, and letters that curl and twist like smoke. In one such town, in the middle of a broad young country, there was a little basement door below the number 263 and a half. Behind it lived a man who had brought with him not only a bundle of shirts to wash and iron, but also a heart full of bitterness and a stolen book of spells. This is the tale of that sour Mandarin, the bright butterfly who became his unwilling servant, and the quiet way in which cruelty finally turned upon itself. Chapter 1. A Sour Heart in Qiangho. Long before the Mandarin's sign hung above the American sidewalk, he had walked the streets of Qiangho, a city far across the ocean. In that crowded place of tiled roofs and narrow lanes, he had once been a person of consequence. His robe had been rich, his hat adorned with a proud red button, his position marked by certain privileges and powers. Yet, beneath the silk and ceremony, there had always been a twisted root. He harbored a steady anger, directed at nearly everyone he encountered. Servants trembled at his voice. Merchants dreaded his approach, for he found fault with goods and prices alike. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw him coming, hoping to escape a torrent of complaints that could sour even a fine day. His displeasure fell heaviest, however, on children. Boys, with their loose energy and laughter, seemed to him the very embodiment of disorder. They darted around him in the street, deliberately or accidentally, and some, braver or more foolish than the rest, would mimic his stiff gait or make faces behind his back. Girls, watching from doorways, sometimes hid their giggles behind their sleeves when his temper sent him stamping away. Mockery stabbed at his pride like needles. Rather than softening him, it hardened his resolve never to smile at the young, never to forgive their small impertinences. Thus, an animosity grew between him and the children of Qiangho, a silent war waged with scowls and jeers. In time, his sourness became so notorious that even those who did not know him by sight heard tales of the Mandarin who never smiles. The gossip reached the outer halls of the imperial city, and, as such things do, finally reached the ears of the emperor himself. A ruler may overlook many failings in a subject, but persistent public ill will is a troublesome thing. An official who makes himself universally hated becomes a knot in the smooth cord of authority. The emperor, considering the matter, decided that the problem would be simplest to untie at a distance. So he issued a command. The Mandarin of Qiangho was to leave the empire and make his way to the distant land across the ocean, there to live out the remainder of his life among strangers. The decree might have crushed another man, but to this Mandarin it came almost as a relief. He had grown weary of the familiar faces that turned away from him, of the laughter that followed him half-suppressed in the streets. In a country where no one knew his history, he might at least trade old scorn for indifferent curiosity. Before he left, however, his heart took one more crooked turn. Among the treasures of Qiangho there lived a wise magician named Hao Tsai, who guarded a great book of magic, an ancient volume whose pages held recipes for potions and spells. The Mandarin, who respected power in any form, coveted this book. On the night before his departure, he crept to Hao Tsai's dwelling, slipped past sleeping servants, and stole the volume from its locked chest. Clutching it under his robe, he hurried away, telling himself that in a foreign land where his rank meant little, magic might restore the sense of importance he feared to lose. With this ill-gotten prize and a small store of coins, he boarded a ship and turned his back on Qiangho. The children of the city watched from the shore, some waving mockingly, others merely curious. He glared at them until distance blurred their faces, then turned his gaze toward the gray line of the horizon where his new life waited. Chapter 2. Laundry on Main Street. The ship that bore the Mandarin across the seas arrived at last in a bustling American port, where tongues unknown to him shouted along the wharves, and wooden carts rattled over cobblestones. From there he traveled inland, following rail lines and riverboats, until he reached a city in the middle of the continent, a place with streets laid out in straight lines, where brick buildings rose beside wooden houses, and church spires pointed at an open sky. Here he rented a dim basement under a taller building on Main Street. Above the door he hung a red and white sign with carefully painted characters and English words that announced his trade. In this new land, many of his countrymen had found work washing clothes for strangers, the fabric of their days soaked with other people's dirt and soap. The Mandarin, for all his former rank, bowed to necessity and did the same. Inside, the shop smelled of starch, damp cotton, and the faint tang of coal smoke from the iron heater. Shirts and dresses hung on lines strung across the low ceiling. On a rough counter he kept stacks of little slips of paper, each marked with characters that to him held clear meaning, but to his customers were simply a promise that their garments would be returned. Other Chinese immigrants lived in the city, working in kitchens, small shops, and laundries of their own. They recognized the significance of the red button on his hat whenever they met him on the street, and, according to old custom, they bowed respectfully. The Mandarin accepted these gestures as his due, but made no effort to know the men who offered them. He had not crossed oceans to seek companionship. His heart had grown used to its own company and saw no reason to change. All day, from morning until late evening, he labored over steaming tubs, rinse buckets, and ironing boards. The work was hard and repetitive, but it brought him coins enough to live. When exhaustion came, he would lock his door, eat a simple meal, and then light a small lamp to study the stolen book. The strange symbols and diagrams within fascinated him. Though Hao Tsai's wisdom had been long in the learning, the Mandarin's mind, sharp if sour, slowly unraveled the meaning of certain passages. He learned to mix small draughts that eased the ache of his hands and powders that brightened dull cloth. His bitterness, however, remained untouched. In this new land, children were no less lively than in Qiangho. They played along the sidewalks, darted around the horses and wagons, and shouted to one another in clear, unafraid voices. To them, the doorway at 263.5 Main Street was a curiosity. From it came the hissing of irons and the smack of wet cloth. In its window hung strange symbols and glimpses of blue and white garments. It was only a matter of time before their attention fixed upon the solitary figure bending over his ironing board. Chapter 3. Faces at the Window. One afternoon, as the Mandarin pressed the wrinkles from a crisp shirt, a shadow fell across his workspace. He glanced up, frowning, and saw a row of faces flattened against the glass of his street-level window. Boys with tumbled hair and girls with ribbons in theirs peered in, noses leaving temporary smudges on the pane. Their eyes shone with frank curiosity. Most men in his position might have smiled, perhaps beckoned the bravest among them inside to watch the iron glide like a little ship over the sea of cloth. But the Mandarin's heart bristled. He saw not innocent interest, but the beginning of mockery. He barked at them in his own tongue, words edged with impatience. He gestured sharply toward the street, ordering them away. The children, startled for a moment, drew back, then, realizing he could not reach them through the glass, grinned in impish delight. Some made exaggerated bows of their own, others waggled fingers. When he returned to his work, their faces reappeared, pressed even closer. Their laughter filtered faintly through the window, a sound muffled but unmistakable. The pattern repeated day after day. As soon as school released them into the afternoon, they ran to Main Street and crowded around the window of the basement laundry. The Mandarin shouted, waved his arms, even threw a damp cloth at the glass once, forgetting in his anger that such gestures only rewarded their mischief. Their visits became for the children a kind of game. There was no real malice in it at first. They were like sparrows chattering at a cat in a window. But for the Mandarin, each grin was a sting, each giggle a confirmation that the world still delighted in tormenting him. On Sundays, the stream of faces ceased. The children stayed home, and the street grew quieter. The Mandarin, who did not share the town's day of rest, used the hours to catch up on work, his iron moving steadily while bells tolled in the distance. It was on one of these quiet Sundays that another visitor came, not to the window, but through the open door. Chapter 4. The Captive Butterfly. The butterfly entered as though it belonged to the sunbeam that accompanied it. Its wings shone with colors arranged in delicate patterns, patches of deep blue rimmed with black, streaks of gold and crimson, little eyes of color peering out from each wingtip. To a child it would have seemed a tiny flying jewel. Drawn by the faint scent of beeswax from the iron's handle, it fluttered across the room, zigzagging in no sensible path as butterflies do. It touched here and there on the hanging clothes, paused above the Mandarin's head, and then drifted toward the small window where the children usually pressed their faces. The Mandarin noticed it almost at once. Beauty did not soften him. Instead, it awakened a possessive impulse. In a world where so little pleased him, he would at least control this bit of living splendor. He shut the door with a decisive slam, then stalked the fluttering creature around a room. His hands, used to catching garments, were surprisingly quick. After several clumsy swipes, he managed to trap the butterfly gently between his fingers. Holding it carefully, so as not to crush its fragile body, he took 2 slender pins from his sewing basket. He pressed the wings flat against a wall and drove a pin through each. The butterfly's body trembled, but, as nature had fashioned it, the wings themselves held little feeling. The pins immobilized it without immediate pain, leaving it hanging like a bright ornament. Stepping back, the Mandarin admired his captive. The wings spread in full display, their intricate designs like stained glass in miniature. Yet admiration alone did not satisfy him. His thoughts turned, as they often did, to the great book of magic in his wooden chest. He fetched it, opened it on the ironing board, and turned the pages with care. Among the many strange recipes, he found one that promised the ability to understand the speech of butterflies and to answer them in their own tongue. The instructions required certain herbs and powders, which he mixed in a tin cup with water, stirring until the liquid clouded. The smell was bitter. He drank it down with a shudder, feeling for a moment as if tiny wings beat inside his head. When the sensation faded, he looked up at the wall. Now, he thought, we shall see what use I can make of such a pretty prisoner. Chapter 5. A Bargain for Life. Standing before the pinned butterfly, the Mandarin addressed it in a series of soft clicks and whispers that felt unfamiliar on his tongue. To his satisfaction, he understood his own speech as clearly as if he were speaking his native words. He asked why the creature had entered his shop. The butterfly answered, its voice light as dust. It spoke of scents drifting on the air, of how the tang of beeswax had promised honey, though it had found none. Its words held no malice. They were matter of fact, like the flight of butterflies themselves. The Mandarin pointed out, with a certain grim satisfaction, that the insect now hung helpless at his mercy, pinned to the wall, and doomed by hunger or his own whim. The butterfly acknowledged this with the quiet resignation of a being whose lifespan is short and whose days are often at the mercy of larger things. Death came soon or late. It made little difference, it said, though it preferred the warmth of the sun and the taste of flowers to any dark end. The Mandarin's mind, never resting from its tight patterns of grievance, suddenly saw a use for this tiny life. He loved control and feared mockery. Here was a chance to combine both impulses into a single, secret revenge. He offered the butterfly a bargain. He spoke of extending its days, of using magic to stretch the fragile thread of its life far beyond the usual span. In return, it would obey him. The butterfly, astonished that a creature as great as a man should need help from something so small, nevertheless agreed. Any chance to continue flitting among flowers seemed worth a promise. The Mandarin then revealed his true desire. Through the window, he said, children tormented him daily with their staring and their laughter. To them, he assigned blame for his own unhappiness. The butterfly admitted that children often chased it as well, eager little hands reaching for its wings. Then they are your enemies as well as mine, the Mandarin declared. With the power in this book and your light touch, we can remake them into something more fitting. He mixed another potion, this time a thicker paste, and commanded the butterfly to dip its front feet into it. With those feet, he explained, it must touch the foreheads of children. The magic would then transform each child into a pig, an animal which, in the Mandarin's mind, matched his opinion of them. The butterfly listened, its delicate antennae quivering. It had promised obedience, and without a human soul to awaken conscience, the words of the promise bound it more by habit than by moral sense. Yet even in such brief lives, a kind of preference can exist. The butterfly did not care for the thought of harming children who brought color and movement to the gardens it visited. Still, with wings pinned and a magician glowering, it dipped its small feet into the glistening mixture. When the Mandarin pulled out the pins and opened the door, it escaped into the open air, beating its wings gratefully. The town lay spread beneath the afternoon sun. Instead of flying immediately toward the schoolyards, the butterfly turned toward the edge of the city, where gardens bloomed. There, among roses and lilies, it soon lost itself in the familiar joy of flitting from color to color. The sticky paste brushed off on petals and leaves quickly wore away. By the time the sun dipped low and the air cooled, any trace of the spell had vanished from its feet. Only then did memory of the Mandarin and his harsh command return. I must return, it thought. He is a magician. If I do not, he may find a way to punish me. But he need not know what I did or did not do. Chapter 6. Lies and Molasses. When the butterfly flew back into the laundry, the Mandarin greeted it with eager eyes. He asked at once whether it had met any children and what had become of them. The butterfly, remembering that it had neither harmed nor even approached a child, nevertheless replied calmly that it had touched the forehead of a fair-haired girl. At this, it said, the girl had snorted and fallen to all fours, turning into a pig. The Mandarin's joy was unrestrained. He clapped his hands, chuckled, and paced the room in small, triumphant circles. To celebrate, he placed a drop of sticky molasses upon the wall, which the butterfly sipped with pleasure. The next morning, he bade the butterfly repeat its task, this time promising even more molasses if it could boast of 2 transformed children by evening. Once again, the insect dipped its feet into the magic mixture, then flew out into the bright world. But instead of seeking schoolyards, it followed its own inclinations, gliding wherever flowers beckoned. That day, however, curiosity led it near a farmyard at the town's edge. There, confined behind a low fence, stood a pig, its small eyes intelligent in a dull way, its snout rooting half-heartedly at the ground. The butterfly, which had spent the previous evening pondering the nature of the spell, hovered above the animal. If the Mandarin's magic truly changes children into pigs, it mused, what might it do if applied in the other direction? Acting on this question, and with a certain mischievous impulse, not unlike that of the children it was meant to harm, the butterfly swooped down and dabbed its enchanted feet against the pig's rough nose. In an instant, the pig vanished. In its place stood a boy, barefoot, muddy, and wild of hair. He blinked, sniffed the air with a familiar gesture, and then, without pausing to consider his change of state, let out a whoop that echoed across the fields. He scrambled over the fence and ran down the road, arms flailing in sheer delight at his unexpected freedom. The butterfly followed, intrigued. What it witnessed over the next hour unsettled even its simple heart. The boy hurled stones at a cat, trampled a carefully planted garden, and tormented a gentle calf with switch and shout until the creature fled in terror. Watching this, the butterfly understood for the first time how cruelty can be borne not only in angry mandarins, but also in careless youth. When the boy later snatched an apple from a little girl's hand and struck her brave companion across the face for daring to scold him, something within the butterfly hardened. Such a one, it thought, brings nothing but pain into the world. If I let him remain, his days will be a trail of tears and bruises. With a resolve unexpectedly fierce, it darted forward and touched his brow with its sticky feet. In a blink, the boy vanished, and a pig stood once more in his place, snorting in confusion before trotting back toward the safety of the sty. The butterfly felt a peculiar mix of satisfaction and relief. Now, at least the harm he can do is limited, it whispered to itself. I have used the magic as ordered, but in a way that perhaps makes the world no worse. When it returned to the laundry that evening, it spoke of different victims, a freckled newsboy and a dark-eyed baby, both supposedly turned into swine. The Mandarin, hearing this, praised the choice enthusiastically and urged a butterfly to seek out more such targets. Night after night, the pattern repeated. The butterfly wandered freely while the sun shone, avoiding children or touching them, only with the harmless tips of its wings. Each evening, it returned with tales of transformations that had never occurred. The Mandarin's glee grew with each report. He rewarded his servant with more molasses, believing the world outside his basement gradually emptied of the boys and girls he despised. Because the butterfly lacked a human soul, it felt no guilt over the lies. Yet, in its own way, it enjoyed outwitting the bitter man. There was a lightness in the deception, a sense that it had found a way to honor its promise of obedience while still protecting the children it had come to admire from afar. Chapter 7. A Snap of the Finger. One evening, wanting to vary its stories so they would not sound too similar, the butterfly claimed to have turned a Chinese boy into a black pig. It expected, perhaps, that this detail would please the Mandarin, who often spoke disdainfully of other immigrants. To its surprise, the tale struck a raw nerve. The Mandarin's face darkened. For a moment, he forgot the insults he associated with American children and remembered instead his own past, the jeers of boys in Qiangho, the mockery of youths who had seen him stripped of authority. Anger flared. Without warning, he snapped his finger at the butterfly, striking it sharply. One delicate wing bent under the blow, nearly tearing. The butterfly reeled, pain lancing through its small body. What had seemed a game of small deceits now revealed its danger. It realized that, to the Mandarin, it was no valued ally but merely another creature to be used and struck when displeasing. Deep resentment settled over it. It refused the customary drop of molasses, though its mouth longed for sweetness. It clung instead to the wall, breathing fast, its injured wing trembling. All through the night, while the city above quieted and slept, the butterfly stayed awake, nursing its anger. It had spared children from transformation. It had preserved the Mandarin's illusion of vengeance. Yet he had rewarded a minor offense with thoughtless cruelty. By morning, the sting on its wing had cooled into a hard, clear intention. Chapter 8. The spell turns homeward. At dawn, the Mandarin rose, sour mood unabated. The memory of Chinese boys, a memory he had once tried to bury under work and distance, gnawed at him. He blamed his butterfly servant for stirring that old irritation, as if the story rather than his own heart were at fault. He barked orders without greeting. "Today," he insisted, "you must double your efforts. 4 children must be changed to make amends." The butterfly remained silent. Its eyes, tiny and black, glittered with something the Mandarin, focused on his own vexation, did not pause to recognize. He prepared the magic mixture with quick, jerky motions and thrust the cup under the butterfly's feet. The creature dipped them as it had done many times before, but instead of flying toward the open door, it lifted off and arrowed straight back at him. Startled, the Mandarin had only a heartbeat to register the small body darting toward his face, the glint of dampness on its front legs. Then it felt the lightest brush upon his forehead. The magic he had brewed did not distinguish between others and himself. It cared nothing for hats or rank, or the red button that once proclaimed his office. Under its power, he was merely another whoever touched by enchanted feet. In the space of a breath, the man who had crossed oceans, who had stolen a book of ancient spells, who had never learned to soften his heart, vanished. In his place, squealing in confusion and discomfort, stood a scrawny pig with bristling hair and a look of perpetual irritation about the eyes. Soon after, a customer entered the laundry, expecting to find the Mandarin ready with pressed shirts. Instead, he discovered an empty counter and, wandering about the room, a miserable pig that bumped into chair legs and squealed whenever a hanging garment brushed its snout. Perplexed and more than a little alarmed, the man backed out, deciding to seek his laundry elsewhere and to ask no questions. The butterfly, its purpose accomplished, flew out through the doorway and made straight for a nearby brook. There, it alighted on a stone and dipped its feet into the cool water, washing away every trace of the magic compound. It had no wish ever again to bear that dangerous power. As evening fell, it settled into the shelter of a rose bush, its injured wing folded carefully against its body. The petals closed around it like soft doors. For the first time in many days, it felt at peace. Closing reflection, small wings, great turning. The story of the Mandarin and the butterfly is, at first glance, a light tale. A harsh man, a bright insect, a bit of magic that turns pride into squealing confusion. Yet, like all such tales, it carries beneath its surface a more enduring meaning. The Mandarin believed that his misery sprang from the laughter of children, from the rude games of boys, from the bright curiosity that pressed faces against his window. His answer to pain was to wish for the world around him to be changed, reshaped, and punished. He sought power not to mend himself, but to bend others. The butterfly, by contrast, began with no strong sense of right or wrong. It had known merely sun, flowers, and the casual dangers of being small in a large world. Yet through its encounters with the cruel boy, once a pig, with the gentle girls who wept over stolen and bruised moments, it came to recognize that some lives add kindness to the air while others sour it. In the end, it used the very magic meant to harm the innocent to remove from the town the one heart that had truly delighted in harm. The children, unaware of how near they had come to being turned into beasts, went on with their games and quarrels and learning. The pig that had been a Mandarin grunted in confusion, living out his days perhaps no more content than before, but at least unable to send his bitterness beyond the walls of his sty. For listeners, the tale offers a gentle warning that resentment, cherished and fed, can twist even magic into a tool of cruelty, that lies told to preserve others from harm may sometimes be the only kindness available, and that sometimes the smallest creatures, those whose wings bruise at a snap of the finger, may yet carry the power to turn injustice back upon itself. Above all, it reminds us that hatred of the young, of their noise and their unpolished ways, blinds the heart to the very freshness the world most needs. A man who cannot endure the sight of children at his window may one day find, as the Mandarin did, that the world continues without him just the same, while a single bright butterfly rests in a rose bush, its wings folded in quiet satisfaction, knowing that in its own small measure it has helped the garden of life to bloom a little more kindly. For more stories that can help you relax, don't forget to like and subscribe.